Pozdravljam sve ispred izdavačke kuće Sandor, koja je prošle godine, krajem ljeta, objavila roman Moj dom, negdje, drugdje, Federice Marzi, koja je večeras ovdje s nama, zahvaljujući programu Društva hrvatskih književnih prevoditelja, njihove književne rezidencije, čiji je Federica trenutačno gost. Molim vas, veliki pljesak za Federicu Marzi. I sad jedna anketa, što mislite o tome, kako se osjećate da ovaj razgovor vodimo većim dijelom na engleskom? Treba li netko prijevod? Meni nije nikakav problem da prevedem Federikine odgovore na hrvatski. Ako mislite da bi to bilo potrebno. Ok, u svakom slučaju, ako možda će trebati neko pojašnjenje, samo signalizirajte i promijenit ćemo jezik. Naime, Federica govori i prevodi sa slovenskoga. Također, moja malenkost ima iskustva sa prijevodom sa slovenskoga, pa bi mi mogli ovo predstavljanje zapravo voditi i na slovenskom, ako vam je draže. Ali ipak, zadržat ćemo se pretežno na engleskom. Zapravo, Federica razumije moj hrvatski, ali kako moj hrvatski baš nije najbolji, onda ćemo se ipak prebaciti na engleski. We are very pleased to have you here, and I am very pleased that we will talk about your book Mia Casa Altrove in Croatian translation tonight. I want to briefly introduce you and your work for the audience tonight. You were born in Trieste and living in Trieste, and you were writing articles after you finished your study. You were writing articles and short stories, publishing them in different magazines. You published your thesis as a book, so this is not your first book, but this is your first novel. And novel was published in Italy in Bottega Errante Edizioni from Udine. Bottega Errante is our partner in a European project called Mirroring the World, also with the Goga publishing house from Novo Mesto. And this translation is a part of this project, co-financed by Creative Europe program of the European Union, but also supported by the Ministry of Culture of Croatia and the Italian Institute, which is giving grants from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Italy. And I'm thanking Mr. Gianluca, who is here from the Italian Institute, also for the support. This book will also come out in English as a part of the project later this year in English translation by Jim Hicks, a great American translator from Italian to English. So your book will have much larger audience than this edition has in the Croatian language. But I have to say Croatian translation is an excellent one, done by Lorena Monika Kmet, who is actually from Buje, a town which is very well described, and a lot of this novel takes place in Buje. So I could feel and I could see and I could read from the text that Lorena really did this translation with her soul, sort of speaking, because the Italian Istrian dialect that you use in the original text for the characters from Istria living in Trieste who speak this dialect. She translated it with the Istarska Čakavica, with the Čakavian dialect of Croatian. So the characters who speak the Istrian Italian dialect actually in this translation speak the Croatian Istrian dialect, and it really functions marvelously. It really gives the flavor to the Croatian translation that I believe your original usage of the dialect gives to the Italian original. Definitely this book was a challenge for the translator, and I believe it will be a challenge for the reader, but I'm not very familiar with Istrian dialect myself, but I could understand most of it from the context. I maybe looked up a word or two while I was reading, but I think that was your intention originally, to distinct the language of the characters who are coming from Istria, the Italians who had to flee after 1954. Did it download? Okay, we are trying to download something, but it doesn't work. This book has two parallel narratives.
Got it.
Oh, great.
Sorry for my phone, but I managed to download my novel in Italian.
Great. So we will read later from both Croatian and Italian. The novel is set. The novel has two basic parallel narratives. One is set in Istria, in Buje, in 1954, at the moment when historical so-called Zone A and B in Istria, after the ending of the Second World War, was dismantled, and many people had to leave. Many Italians had to leave Istria and go to Italy because they just didn't feel welcome in the new country, Yugoslavia, that took over majority of Istrian territory. And the other narrative is set in the war in the 90s, post ex-Yugoslav war, when a Bosnian family from Zvornik is fleeing Bosnia and coming to Trieste. In each of these narratives, we have a strong female protagonist, and Norina, the protagonist, who was just a young woman when she had to flee Buje in Istria and come and relocate to Trieste. She is also present in the story, in the contemporary story in the 90s and the 2000s, when she's meeting a Bosnian young woman, Amila, who is a refugee from Zvornik, and works in her house to help she and her husband, because they are elderly people and they need somebody to take care of the household. How come you, Federica, how come you combined these two stories? What was your intention?
Okay, so first of all, thank you very much. Thank you, Ivan, Sršen and Sandor, for publishing my novel. Thank you very much, Društvo hrvatskih književnih prevodilaca, for hosting me in this amazing town for 2 weeks. Thank you very much, Ursula Burger. Grazie all'Istituto Italiano di Cultura di Zagabria per aver contribuito alla traduzione di questo romanzo e per aver supportato questa serata e per essere qui, naturalmente. Thank you very much, Puksa. It's a wonderful place, an amazing one, another one I'm discovering. And of course, naravno, hvala vam da ste došli, hvala vam svima. Žao mi je da ne pričam hrvatski večeras, ali nadam da ću u redu. So, how did I decide to combine these two stories? So it's a question that has been asked me many times. Well, on the one hand, a family story has flown into this novel. I come from a very complex family. My mom is an Italian from Istria who came to Italy as a refugee when she was a child. My dad was a local Slovenian from Trieste. As to the Eastern part of my family, some of them, like my mom, left. Some of them, like other relatives, cousins, aunts, uncles, stayed. Stayed in Yugoslavia, I mean. And I was born, spent my childhood and part of my life in Trieste, which is for Italy a very marginal town, and it's a town on the border, on a border. Of course, I wanted somehow to go back to some of our family stories. My mom, my grandparents, what happened, why did I decide to leave their Istria, their homeland, and come to Italy. So I wanted to go very deep into this story. I wanted to investigate it, but I needed a different framework. I needed a contemporary story. I wanted to write a contemporary story. You mentioned many dates, 1954, 1991, 2, 3, 4, and so on, and 2004, 2005. Well, it's not now, but of course it brings all that story into a contemporary framework. And I wanted to consider and to focus a very old migration story, or an old migration story, that from Istria, with a more contemporary story, migration story, another one, and that's the story of the second character, Amila, coming from northeastern Bosnia in the 90s. I wanted to compare them. I wanted to show differences, but also what they have in common, similarities. And in the end, I wanted the two stories to flow and to combine and to melt into a third narration, into a third narrative that could help me to discuss, of course, about migration, contemporary migration in Italy, but not only in Italy, but could also help me focus, investigate, and discuss topics such as identity, plural identities, bilingual identity, identity in migration, frontier people, frontier families, and what this all could mean nowadays.
The very act of speaking about these historical events often makes people divided or feel uncomfortable because there are several, let's say, official truths Maybe we'll first give a little historical background into what actually happened in Istria after Second World War, and then we can talk about how to write about it and how to write about people's feelings, traumas, frustrations about certain historical events and about the interpretations of the events. What actually happened after the Second World War?
So let's talk about one of the female characters of the novel, Norina, whose name is Norina. Norina was born in Italy, before Second World War, and she was born in Istria, that's the Italian name of the town. After the Second World War, she stayed for many years trapped in another country, which was the free territory of Trieste, divided into two zones, as you reminded. Zone A, administrated by the English-American troops, and Zone B, administrated by the Yugoslavian troops. In 1954, Norina is 20 years old, and with the London Memorandum, the border was definitely drawn. And her hometown, Istria, became just Buje in Yugoslavian at that time. And her own town was included into a new country, that is Yugoslavia. And her destiny was similar to many, many other Italians who lived there, many of whom still are there. With her family, she decided to move to Italy. It's a very contradictory or controversial somehow story. As an Italian, she was supposed to go back to her home country. But it wasn't so easy, okay? Let's say it wasn't so easy. So what happened in 1954? People had to decide in a very brief space of time whether to stay or to leave. And of course, if they decided to stay, they had to decide to become different, to become of a different nationality, to become citizens of another state, to learn a new language, perhaps to go to a school where another language was spoken. At the time, it wasn't very clear if the so-called minority rights would have been respected. Or they could decide to leave their hometown and go to Italy. But to do that, they have to abandon, with a formal act, all their properties, whatever they had, land, houses, and so on. And once they came over to the so-called homeland, what happened? Many different things, of course, but what happened to my character, as to many other people, she stayed for many other years in a refugee camp in Trieste, in the surrounding area, na Krasu, in the Karst, in a small village called Padrice, in Slovenia. And she spent a lot of time there without knowing, what would happen to her family, how life would go on. Many of those people, among them Norina's sister, decided to migrate a second time. And it was another mass migration at the time, particularly from the Venezia Giulia, from Trieste, from the Venezia Giulia, from the Primorska. And many of those people, like Norina's sister, went to what was at the time called the newest continent, which was Australia. It was at the other end of the world. So can you imagine someone very young leaving his or her hometown, a village in Istria, coming across the border, ending up in a refugee camp, and then living forever, because those were the conditions. So you didn't live just for a while, just for 2 weeks, just for a couple of months, and living forever for another continent, not for another country, but for another continent. And Norina, my character, will always regret not having had the same courage her sister had, and keeping imagining how her life would have been if she had migrated so far away, not staying in Trieste, where in the end she felt all her life long a refugee. Of course, all those people were stereotyped, labeled as migrants, as Slavic people, as foreigners. Norina, my character, Norina has a typical Italian Venetian name, Benci. But for instance, my Italian mom from Istria, has a typical Croatian surname, Kovacic. She's Kovacic, written the Italian way, but she's a Kovacic. So I'm a Kovacic too, and I was a Marz too, but okay, it's another long story. And so we meet Norina in 2004, 50 years after her migration. And somehow she's still a refugee. So she never adapted, she never integrated, she never felt at home. And she always missed her homeland, her hometown. But she's got a sort of refuge, which is what you mentioned at the very beginning, her language, which is a dialect, which is almost the same dialect spoken in Trieste. It's an Istrian Venetian dialect, but it's not the same. And that dialect makes her different because she wants to emphasize, to stress her different in front of the others. And that's her last and extreme, most extreme refuse. The language that she only speaks, the only one. She's the only one who speaks this dialect in the city. And in the novel, she's, of course, the only one who speaks a dialect in all her dialogues.
And then, with coming of Amila, a young woman who came to Trieste at a young age, when she was in the primary school with her family, running away from the war in Bosnia. That's when the story unfolds. And it's very interesting how Federica puts together, combines the two stories of Norina and Amila. These stories are very different from different time, but they, as I said, Amila is taking a job to help around the house for Norina and her husband, and we follow Norina's regrets and her own problems and traumas from 50 years ago, when she actually, we wouldn't reveal what is happening, but she had a love, let's say a love affair that was destroyed by by the very fact that everybody had to move, and she never went by the border, and she never went over it. So her story is completely different from Amila's story, who came to Italy as a young girl and considers herself Italian, maybe more than a Bosnian. But these two stories, what is great in this book is that these two stories kind of coexist. They don't really become one story, but they coexist, and that's a certain point that Federica is making in this book, that in the migratory world we live side by side, but we don't actually ever dare to ask the other one, what is his problem, what is his trauma, what is his feeling, how does he look at the things, how does he look at the town, how does he see his neighbors. And as I said, that's how the story unfolds. We start following both Norina and Amila. So tell us more about Amila and what is her quest, or what is her trauma, and what kind
background. Let's perhaps talk about your background first. Yeah. Okay, so Amila comes from Zvornik, which is a town situated in northeastern Bosnia. She's Bosniak, that is, she comes from a Muslim culture. Zvornik is a town located not very far away from Srebrenica. And unfortunately, Zvornik shared the same destiny, or almost the same destiny, as Srebrenica. It's a town situated along the Drina. Amila used to live in a district called Ruska Zgrada. And Zvornik faces another small town just across a bridge and just across the river, which is called Mali Zvornik, and which is located in Serbia. So Zvornik had also, because of that, a very key role during the war, sadly. Amila manages to escape just before, a couple of days before everything collapses. So she doesn't really experience directly the tragedy in her hometown. She manages to flee, she manages to escape together with her family, which is, a very open-minded, a very secular family too, not religious. A family who really believed in Yugoslavia and what this country was, and in its ideals, and particularly in the ideal of many people of different cultures. Well, no, it's it's a word I wanted to avoid. Well, of people people with different backgrounds living together. And Amila arrives in Italy when she's a small child, and her family decides to settle down in Trieste as the closest town to their former land, to the land they abandoned, they left. As if they could all the time have a look at their left abandoned country, at their homeland, but with something different in addition, which for Amila is very, very important, and which is the sea. So Amila arrived in Italy as a small child. She was educated in Italian schools. She's a daughter of a former primary school teacher, Papa Željko, I don't know how Lorena translated Papa Željko, I think, in Croatian.
No, it's otac or
okay, Jim did
tata,
it. Yeah. Jim did it, Papa Željko in English. So in English it's Papa Željko. So her Papa Željko is a former primary school teacher, very open-minded. He, a very wise man, and most of all, above all, he's for the social justice, so that he gets involved very quickly in Italy in politics. He works for a union and he tries to help migrants, or he fights for migrants' rights. Amina is a sort of Amina represents a new Italian in the end. That's a word we use in Italy to describe this not so new phenomenon. She could be seen as a second generation of migrants, even though she wasn't born in Italy, but she was educated in Italy, she grew up in Italy, and she speaks better Italian than Bosnian. She talks of her language as a prehistorical language, a language that she can speak but not really write, or not write very well. She's got a lot of projects for her life. Sorry. And most of all, her father, when they migrated, her father promised her to have a better life in Italy. So she's hardly struggling for a better life, which for her means to live and feel like an Italian, even though she hasn't got the formal citizenship, any formal citizenship. And that's, of course, a problem about which we are still not discussing in Italy, I think. So about the fact that our kids educated in our Italian schools don't have access to scholarships, to public jobs, internships, Erasmus. They won't vote, and so on, and so on, and so on. And the story begins when Amina decides not to go back to Sarajevo for one summer, as she usually do, or as she usually did. Her family thinks it's their duty to go back, to see their country, to see how their country their country developed further, and if there would be any chance for them to go back. So they are a little bit suspended. But she imposes herself and says no. For one summer she wants to stay in Trieste and not to go back with her family to spend all her summer long in a town that doesn't mean many things for her. She says it's just a town with green hills that surround it. And why? Because she wants to enjoy a typical summer in Trieste. She wants to go to the beach every day, and she's still waiting for her first love to appear. And that's why she will meet Norina. She needs an excuse not to go to Bosnia, because for her parents, of course, is very bad, is a sort of affront. And she needs an excuse. And for her parents, the only acceptable excuse could be to work. And to do odd jobs for the summer to help the family and so on. And that's why she will enter Norina's house, and how the story will start.
and she will meet somebody and fall in love, but it can sound, some readers told me that they think this is a love story.
Yes, it is. Yes.
And I like that.
I insist on it. It is.
I like that part of the book, and it somehow also echoes Norina's unreturned love, because in the times of struggle, or when you have to escape, or when you somehow feel that you left your old life behind and you had to start the new one, then you much more live through the feeling of a loss than maybe when you didn't have to make such tough decisions as to move to another country. So the love story here would maybe be a usual love story if it would be set in another setting, but the love story in this book becomes a very special love story because it was interrupted by some events which nobody could have turned back and which nobody could have opposed. So it somehow becomes a destiny. But Federica wrote it in a way that you see this destiny is created by politics, it's created by trade, it's created by generals who want fame, and so on and so on. And then there is another stream of story, another line of story, and that's reappearance or search for Norina's lost love, and I see it as a kind of a metaphor. And how much did you want to send a message in this book, or you just wanted to explore the characters?
It's a difficult question, of course, Ivan. I started learning your way of asking questions. I think it's not a novel with a message in the bottle. But I think there is a lot of tension, and there is a lot of discussion within the narrative, because it's a story, it's a fictional story with a plot, with love, with mystery, with running across the border one way and the other way, and so on. And I think the book is very unquiet about the message, because the message is unquiet itself. And it's an investigation, as I said before, about many topics that, of course, flow into each other. Starting from the question of home, mój dom negdje, drugdje, my home somewhere else. Where is this elsewhere? What's the elsewhere? Is it the homeland, left back, left behind? Or is it the new country? And what about identity? Where do you belong to? Have you got the right to call your home a place where you weren't born? And what about the other country? What do you have to do with that? Forget it? Leave it forever? Cancel it from your memory? What to do with such difficult, tremendous backgrounds, even though you didn't create them, but you couldn't did anything to avoid them or to improve them or to escape them. So what to do and how to live when your feet are in two different shoes? When your first language, or when you feel your first language is not the so-called mother tongue, but it's a language of arrival. And how to find a balance in all of that. So it's a book that launches many questions, of course trying to give many different answers, but I chose to assume a very precise point of view. And that's a point of view that tries to show diversities, that is, different ways of answering all of those questions. And also sometimes the same person can answer differently in different stages of his or her life to all these questions. Thank you for nodding. I'm sure you experience it. So, as I told you, perhaps if I just can add that, as we said a couple of hours before, I think that doesn't concern or regard only migrants or so-called migrants. I think it regards, it happens to all of us. So who doesn't come from somewhere else? Who hasn't been somewhere else? Who wouldn't like to go somewhere else? Who doesn't live perhaps with someone coming from somewhere else? Who doesn't have to cope daily, every day, with someone coming from somewhere else?
Croatian historian and writer and a translator, Predrag Matvejević, he wrote a book, Who is Here is From Here. Tko je tu odavde? And he actually deals with this question of Balkan identities and what does it mean to be to belong to a home or to belong to a certain group or to a certain identity. So this.
Oh, sorry for interrupting you, and of course we don't have to forget all the political questions implied. So who has the right to be included? Who has the right to be excluded? Who do we have to include? Who do we have to exclude, and why?
Yeah.
On which basis?
This book deals with these questions, but also it could be called, and we can discuss about it, should it be called an emigre novel or not? But I found it interesting that it does have a characteristic of an emigre novel, because in famous emigre novels like Isaac Bashevis Singers or even newer novels like Alexander Hammond wrote Project Lazarus, or even in Knausgaard novels when he's describing his life in Stockholm, it's a lot of description of non-verbal communication, because when you find yourself in a new surrounding, you watch all the non-verbal signs, because that's what you're focused on before you completely feel comfortable in speaking and moving around in the new language or in the new society. So the descriptions of these kind of descriptions are very much you can find them throughout the book, and they're even the narrator Federica is pondering on these moments, and these are some of the most beautiful passages. So I would like to read a passage when Norina is taking care of her husband who fell down their boat about 70-something years old. And that's why Amila is coming to help in their house. But at this moment they are alone, and we see them just at one everyday situation in their house in Brišće.
Yes. So of course many names. In Trieste, around Trieste, in the area surrounding Trieste, and of course in all the Istrian area in Slovenia and in Croatia. So places have more than one official name, and that's Predstavljanje in Italian and Brišće in Slovenia.
So it's Norina and her husband Mariano in their home. Čitala je lokalne dnevne novine od prve do zadnje stranice da mu prođe vrijeme. Zurio je u prozor okrenut na bok, glave utonule u jastuke. Jeo je sam jer nije mogao sići stepenicama, a Norini je dojadilo prazna želuca sjediti na rubu kreveta. Malo su razgovarali, samo najnužnije. To je bilo jedino što se nakon Nevijine smrti pogoršalo. Možda jer ni Mariano nije mogao zaplakati. Nekomunikacija je bila jedini način da budu zajedno.
No way, I'm sorry.
You didn't find it? Okay, we thought Federica could read it in Italian, but we can't find the passage. Maybe another one. Maybe.
No, sorry, I can't find it.
That's okay.
It's very sorry, but it's very difficult to deal with a PDF. It's a No, sorry. Sorry about
we will skip the reading in Italian.
Yes, I had a very...
Read everything else.
So do you want a passage of Norina or a passage of Amila?
Norina. Good.
Thank you. So I'm trying to go back to the beginning because I'm quite at the end of my PDF and I'm really lost. I'm sorry. I'd like to... I'd like to read a very... Would you like to say something in the meanwhile?
Maybe you could just read a random page, just look anything.
Oh,
it's all good, right?
Okay.
It's been published by so many different publishers, right?
No, maybe because we came to almost to the end of the conversation, we can take the questions from the audience.
Then I
Please.
will read, promised.
I wanted to ask this. I know that for some authors, the names of the main characters are not so important, and the authors choose them lightly or even casually sometimes. For other authors, names are very important and takes a long time to decide how to call your character. I wanted to know what was your choice? If names are important or your characters, and how you ended up choosing Norina and Amila.
Well, that's a marvelous question. Thank you very much. It's a very important passage while writing a novel, to choose the name of the characters. It's not easy. Sometimes they just arrive. Sometimes I happen to think about them for a very long time. And, for instance, in Shakespeare or in Dickens, names usually mean something different, so you know about the character because of his or her name. Of course, we do contemporary literature now, and it's not the case, it's not my case. But Norina is a typical Istrian name. Amila, it is also a quite widespread Bosnian name. How did I choose them? Because of course they are typical or widespread names, but there are so many other names I could have chosen. It's because of the sound, I think, that responds somehow to their personality. And if I have to choose some names, it wasn't the case of Norina and Amila, but if I have to choose a name because perhaps it's too similar to another one, or because the editor asks me for any reason to change it, it's very difficult to do it, because as soon as a character receives a name, his or her personality is somehow fixed. And Amila, it was a name. It was a name that at the very beginning sounded okay for me, but it became also part of the story. So just to say how important names are, it became part of the story because Amila sounds Italian because of the syllables a, mi, la. Not Session, but a, mi, la. How you would just spell Amina or Monica and so on. And that becomes part of Amila's destiny, the fact that people think at the very beginning she's Italian because her name sounds so Italian, but not really 100%. Yes.
Doesn't it also mean in Italian tu ami quello ciò di là?
That's very nice. I didn't think about it, but yes, also alma resounds in it, soul, anima. So yes, but it could be an interpretation, of course. Sometimes, you can't really control everything. And Norina is a little bit a little Nora. So it's a sweet name to me. It's a very unusual name for Trieste and for Italy, I suppose. But it suits to her. So they are they. And I want to read a passage, if you agree. It's a chapter I love reading. It's about Amila, but then we can, if you want, we can go on to Marina too. The chapter is called Zemlja in the original. Zemlja. Cos'è? Zemlja?
Il paese.
Bravissimo. But not only, it's a word with a very broad spectrum of meanings. Zemlja. Simon si fermò. Simon is Marina's grandnephew, who of course comes to Trieste exactly that summer, and of course will fall in love with Amila and will have a very close affair with her. But not only. We will go across many borders, in search for both their origins and a new belonging for everybody and both of them too. Quindi, Zemlja. Simon si fermò sotto la targa incastonata nel muro, una poesia di Igo Gruden, un poeta sloveno di Trieste. Sollevò lo sguardo con un interesse da turista pensoso. Amila gli lesse i versi ad alta voce. Zemlja, che vuol dire? Parla della terra. Land? No, di quelli che vivono su questa terra. Earth? No, Zemlja è un'altra cosa. E cosa? Sono i versi di un poeta di queste parti, Igo Gruden. E che dice? Che qui riposano i suoi nonni e che perciò bisogna continuare a lottare per la propria terra. È la tua lingua, vero? Simon allora sapeva dell'altra lingua che interferiva con il suo italiano. No, è sloveno, ma anche noi diciamo Zemlja. Questa lingua ti dona. Nessuno le aveva mai detto niente di simile, ma Simon diceva con naturalezza cose che erano fuori misura, dando l'impressione di scivolare sulle parole o di afferrarle da un fuori contesto. Dai, vieni, lo esortò Amila. Simon la seguì lungo il passaggio, rimasto libero degli asciugamani, finalmente sono al mare, they are at the beach. Ma la tua lingua è il serbo-croato? O il croato-serbo? Lo provocò lei. Attento qua, o passiamo dietro lo scoglio oppure si entra in acqua. Il serbo-croato era un'unica lingua fino alla guerra. Dopo te ne potevi portare a casa 4, come al discount. Il bosniaco, il croato, il serbo e il montenegrino, gli spiegò Amila mostrandogli su ciascuna delle dita della mano. È stato un vero affare. Ora possiamo metterle tutte nel nostro curriculum vitae.
Ima li još pitanja? Želite li da pročitamo još koji pasus? Do you want to read another?
As soon as I find.
Perhaps a question on. Actually, I have a lot of questions, but one or two just. A question on your relation towards the usual names of the literature of immigration, Tomica or people like that. Did you have to take them apart, even if you love them, to write as a new writer of another generation, or to integrate them? And so what was the dialectic between this old stratum of Italian writers from Istria and your proper Odyssey in writing?
Mm-hmm. So, thank you for this very important question. You mentioned the right name, Fulvio Tomica. I don't know if you know him. I wouldn't describe his literature as a migration literature, even though it has to do with migration, and particularly with migration from Istria. But Fulvio Tomiza is, well, for us, an author from Trieste author. Of course, is the great Istrian soul in Istria. He wrote his novels in Italian. They got translated into Croatian, almost all of them, and they have been translated particularly by Lorena Monica Kmet, who translated Moj dom, negdje, drugdje, and who is also a member of the Association of Literary Croatian Translators. But thank you for mentioning Fulvio Tomiza. That's a novel that considers and that that has in mind so many works and so many pieces of particularly Trieste literature. Trieste is a literary city, a literary town. Many writers were born in Trieste, set their novels or poetry, like Umberto Saba, in Trieste. Some Trieste authors are considered among the most important authors in Italy. But coming back to Fulvio Tomiza, so thank you for mentioning him. I didn't try to come over Tomiza, if not by the fact that I tried to set my story in a contemporary framework. But Tomiza is for me a lighthouse. Why? I consider him the best and the most Triestino among the Triestini authors. Why? Because he could assume many points of view, because of his point of view, not only because he reported about Istria and about migration from that land, from that country, from those lands, but because he could assume a point of view in between. He could write about Istria and at the same time about Trieste, about the heart of the city, and at the same time he could write, and he did, about the Slovenian community in Trieste. He could write about the communities living outside Trieste. He, perhaps as you might know, he arrived in Trieste as a refugee, but decided to go to Koper and then to Belgrade and then to Ljubljana to continue his studies and also to work as a theater director. And in the end, he decided not to go back, but to sort of go back to his home village, Materada in Istria, not very far away from Buje, and to live there for a while, and going back to Trieste for a while, and going back to his hometown for a while. So Tomiza is very, very important to me. He's a model, not to overcome, my God, not. He's a model, but just because of this particular point of view. And for me, in my opinion, no other Triestino author, Trieste author, could really assume such a point of view. Of course, we've got marvelous authors from Trieste, great giants, but not having this kind of cross-cultural point of view on the city and on, of course, of all the vast area that surrounds Trieste, or where Trieste looks at.
Thank you, Federica. This was a lovely expose, and I would like to end with this thought that Moj dom, negdje, drugdje is actually searching for a place in between.
Mm-hmm. Oh yes, it explores what this place is, which is, by quoting one of our favorite philosophers, Stuart Hall, a contradictory, stony ground.